Hello everybody, this is TipTop MTG here today with another Magic the Gathering video. In today's video, we are going to be looking at all of the spoilers that have come out today being January 11th for Kaldheim. So I'm going to go over all the spoilers, kind of break down what they do, what I think of them, whether they'll be impactful or not, and we'll just talk about all of that in general. So why don't we just jump right into this? Starting off, we have Kaya's Onslaught. It's a 3-cost white instant, and it says, target creature gets +1/+1 and gains double strike until end of turn. And then it has Foretell for 1 white, and then Foretell, for those of you who don't know, essentially means that you can pay 2 generic mana to exile it face down, and then you can cast it later for its Foretell cost. And you still have to do the right timing. So if a sorcery has Foretell, you can still only Foretell it at sorcery speed. You can also only pay the 2 mana to exile it face down during your turn. So yeah, pretty interesting card. The cost to Foretell it is exactly the same as to just cast it. So, it's not that big of a deal, although you do get the advantage of kind of being able to maybe pay the 2 a turn on 1 turn. And then later on, you can just pay 1, and then maybe that lets you stack it with another combat boost, which Double Strike would really like you to do. So yeah, I think this card works really well as for a Foretell card. Some of them are a little more lame, just being creatures, and they don't really have any interesting dynamic effect with it, but I think this is one of the good uses of it, where you would want to cast this spell with multiple things, so it makes sense to be able to cast it for cheaper if you pay a little bit ahead of time. Next we have Divine Gambit. It's a 2-cost white sorcery, and it says, exile target artifact, creature, or enchantment an opponent controls. That player may put a permanent card from their hand onto the battlefield. Okay, so at first when I saw this, I was like, okay, this is a garbage card, but at least it's janky. And then I realized, no, you can only target an opponent. And honestly, if you could target your own stuff, actually, it would be pretty insane. So I'm thinking to myself, okay, what is this card used for? Okay, so in Limited, maybe they don't have a big thing, maybe they don't have any cards in hand, and it's fine. But honestly, it wouldn't surprise me if this card actually does see play, and because after a little while of thinking about it, I realized, you know what, this might be a sideboard card, and you might be like, what? But think about it, if there is ever a control deck that pretty much runs there are very few permanents, and is instead running mostly counterspells, this is not awful removal. But then again, if that's the case, you don't really have anything you're removing. So I really think that this card is one that really needs to be dependent on the meta. If the meta is all about playing a bunch of small, tiny little things, then maybe this card's a little bit better. But then again, you're then not going to need to worry about it. Instead, you can just, board wipe. So I think this will honestly just be a limited card that, is useful maybe later in the game when your opponent doesn't have any cards in hand. So, yeah. Next, we have Run Ashore. It's a 6-cost blue instant, and it says choose one or both. So you can choose both of these if you want. It says the owner of target non-land permanent puts it on the top or bottom of their library. I believe they get to choose, and then return target non-land permanent to its owner's hand. So it's a double removal spell for 6. Honestly, I would rather just board wipe for 6, and by board wipe I mean bounce everything back to hand. Obviously, you have the advantage here of not having to bounce your own stuff, but this is just way too expensive for an effect, and it is nice that you kind of get to choose one or both, but it isn't something that, it's just not super interesting. It's a little expensive, and I feel like we have better cards in Standard now. Next, we have Littjara Kinseekers. It's a 4-cost blue creature shapeshifter 2/4 with changeling, so it's every single creature type. And when it enters the battlefield, if you control 3 or more creatures that share a creature type, so if you're running either a tribal deck or a changeling deck, put a +1/+1 counter on the Kinseeker, then scry 1. Even with a +1/+1 counter, it's a 3/5. That's not awful for a blue card. It's actually pretty good. And then you could scry 1. Honestly, I feel like every changeling has its benefit, especially being in blue. It fits really well into those wizard party decks, or decks that, because party decks don't generally run green. That's not necessarily true, but none of the party tribes have green in them. So the fact that this is blue is probably a really good thing for it. Do I see changeling decks being a thing? No, I see picking the best creature type that has the most support. and then just adding all the changeling support on top of that, and you might actually get something really good there. This feels like a limited card to me. I really don't see it seeing much play unless it is one of the, unless it fits well in a tribal deck that's missing a 4-drop. Outside of that, I really don't see it doing much. If it said draw a card, then we'd be maybe on a different talking point, but I just don't see it doing much. Next, we have a newel. It's a 1-cost blue instant, and it says counter target artifact or enchantment spell. Yeah, pretty interesting. Again, this one might be a sideboard card depending on how the meta looks. If there's a deck that does focus a lot on artifacts or enchantments, I could definitely see this being sideboarded in, but it is a very situational card. You don't want to run this against a deck that isn't running artifacts and enchantments. It's like putting a naturalize in your deck. You can do it, but it's not going to be the best card a lot of the time, so it's often better to be just sitting in the sideboard. So yeah, that's kind of my opinion on it. Next, we have this card, which translates into Rune of Aviation. It's a 2-cost blue enchantment aura rune, enchant permanent. When it enters the battlefield, draw a card, and then as long as enchanted permanent is a creature, it has flying. As long as enchanted permanent is an equipment, it has equipped creature has flying. So this is the first we're seeing of runes. We knew that they were coming and that they'd be a new type, and we didn't know what they would exactly be. But if the translation is correct, it seems like it'll be a thing that can either enchant specifically a creature or can enchant an equipment. So it's, obviously it can enchant anything. You could enchant a land with this, which you might think, why would you ever want to do that? Well, there are some decks, specifically like in Commander, I don't remember the name, Estrid the Mast, I believe, that can untaps all enchanted permanents, and this is kind of a cheap way to enchant literally anything, but that's not necessarily the point. If we're looking at it from a standard and historic kind of sense, this is kind of cool. Runes look like they're going to either be able to directly go onto a creature, in which case it will just give it an effect, or you can put it on equipment, and then that equipment now gives the creature the effect, which I think is honestly better. People run way more creature removal than than artifact removal, and if you enchant a equipment with this, then you can kind of move it around compared to just leaving it on a creature. But of course, you still have the option to put it on a creature if you just need to do that and you don't have one. And so I think it's very versatile, and again is one of those auras that is going to alleviate some of the 2-for-1 problems, especially saying this one replaces itself. But even ignoring that, it's a lot more likely that they blow up your creature than blow up your equipment. So I think in an equipment deck, this could be kind of interesting, especially saying that you are generally wanting to be able to make your creature not be able to be blocked. Yeah, I think runes are interesting. I think the fact that it has the rune type doesn't really do anything. It will just be the fact that it, does this whole effect, but maybe there's something missing in translation. Maybe, it's literally only there so that cards can refer to it. So yeah, it'll be interesting to see what that kind of leads to. Next we have Revive the Draugr. It's a 2-cost black instant, and it says choose one. Either return target creature card from your graveyard to your hand, very generic, very boring, or return 2 target creature cards that share a type from your graveyard to your hand. This reminds me of a similar card, I don't remember the name, but there is one that definitely exists like this. I would rather run Midnight something from Throne of Eldraine, which is just a creature, and it also has a 2-cost spell that returns a creature from your graveyard to your hand. I would rather run that, but if you're running a tribal deck, especially in limited, this is a pretty good card. Normally it's kind of just a cantrip for a card in your graveyard, but it can also kind of beat card advantage as well. So depending on your deck, you might consider running this, but I just generally don't think it's a great effect, and there are better ones. Next we have Dog Pursuit. It is a 4-cost black enchantment. At the beginning of your end step, each opponent loses 1 life and you gain 1 life. So very generic card. I mean, you're putting a timer on your opponent, and that's about it. It's not interesting. It's not fun. It's just there. Next we have this card, which translates to Death Knell Berserker. It's a 2-cost black creature, elf berserker 2/2, and when it dies, if it had 3 or more power, create a 2/2 black zombie token. So it's a 2/2, and if you can somehow boost it, whether it be with an enchantment, with an equipment, with a boost spell, you get a 2/2. Now, in the past, we've had 2-cost 1/1s that just always create a 2/2 on death, so I don't think this is necessarily a good card, but if you are running that equipment deck, it's not awful, because it does, again, alleviate some of that 2-for-1age. You are not maybe losing your creature because, maybe you lost the aura, but you didn't lose necessarily the creature. So yeah, definitely think it has its place in limited, but again, it's a common. I'm not thinking it's going to be very good. Next we have a Blood Sky Berserker. It's a 2-cost black creature human berserker 1/1, and whenever you cast your second spell each turn, put 2+1/+1 counters on it. It gains menace until end of turn. That is no joke. If you can consistently cast 2 spells per turn, it is getting pretty big pretty fast. However, in order to do this, so let's say turn 4 you play this guy, then you cast another spell. Well, he's kind of now a 3/3 temporarily menace, which doesn't matter because it doesn't have haste, for 2. But then it stays as a 3/3, doesn't gain menace. So if you can cast 2 spells the turn he comes out, he's a 3/3 with menace. And then if you can ever cast 2 again, that's pretty cool. It works really well with foretell, as you can kind of maybe one turn just foretell like 2 or 3 cards, and then the next turn cast 2 cards for much cheaper because you already paid some of the mana cost. So yeah, I think in a foretell deck, especially limited, be pretty good. I don't know how much play it'll see outside of that, but it's definitely no joke. 2 counters can be a lot, especially when you can do it every turn. It also doesn't say your turn, so if you can cast them during your opponent's turn, it can also grow. Next we have Tegrids Shadow. It's a 5-cost, a black instant, and it says each player sacrifices 2 creatures, and then you can foretell it for 4. I don't like this card because obviously part of the idea is that you're also sacrificing creatures, but I feel like it'll go into a deck that doesn't run creatures, and those generally aren't necessarily fun. Yeah, but yeah, during your turn you can pay 2 and exile it face down, and then you can do it as an instant. Again, I like instants foretelling more than others, but yeah, I'm not a huge fan of this card. Next, we have Rise of the Dreadmarn. It's a 3-cost black instant, and it says create X 2/2 black zombie creature berserker tokens, where X is the number of creatures that died this turn, and then it has foretell for a black. This card's already been leaked. I'm not going to talk too much about it, but again, this is probably one of my favorite foretell cards in the set that we've seen. I don't know, I haven't seen all the foretell cards, obviously. Because not only is it an instant, and I think foretell works best on instants, but it also is a reactionary one. You're not going to cast this on a turn where none of your creatures died, but if your opponent board wipes and you only have 1 black mana left, because you foretold and you saw that all your creatures were going to die, maybe you saw that your opponent, maybe they were going to die, or something. Maybe you somehow know that your opponent has a board wipe. You can foresee it coming. You can kind of pay the 2 mana ahead of time and then kind of keep this 1 mana open to kind of come back from it. So I definitely think it's an awesome card. Next we have draugr, Necromancer. It's a 4-cost black creature, snow creature actually, zombie cleric 4/4, and it says if a non-token creature an opponent controls would die, instead exile that card with an ice counter on it. You may cast spells from among cards in exile your opponent's control with ice counters on them, and you may spend mana from snow sources as though it were mana of any color to cast it. So this is a pretty cool card. So for 4 mana, and it's pretty powerful, if you kill one of your opponent's things, not only does it get exiled, which destroys Uro. It does a lot of things with graveyard shenanigans, but not only that, but you get to cast them. So if your opponent casts some crazy 7-drop, you can kill it and then later cast it for 7. However, unlike normal effects that just let you spend mana of any color, you can only spend snow mana of any color, meaning that you need to make sure you're running snow mana, otherwise you might not have the colors to cast it. So yeah, you have to have at least enough snow mana to cover the amount of colored mana, or actually have those colors. So yeah, definitely think it's an interesting card. It is very powerful. Like for 4 mana, that's a pretty big effect, and it can generate you a lot of value. But it really depends against the deck you're going up against. If again the deck you're going up against doesn't have any creatures, this is kind of a dead card. Next we have Haigi Mob. It's a 5-cost black creature troll berserker 5/4, and it has Boast. Boast is an ability that essentially can be activated once per turn, but only if the creature has attacked. So you can only activate this ability if it has attacked this turn and only once. So you can pay 2 mana and it deals 1 damage to any target. Very generic, very boring, very limited base. Next, we have Open the Omen Path. It's a 3-cost red instant, and it says choose 1. Either add 2 mana of one color and 2 mana of another color, and only spend this mana to cast creatures or enchantment spells, or creatures you control get +1/+0. So this card, okay, is interesting. It very much feels like it's intended for limited, but I definitely see a world where it isn't intended for janky purposes. For instance, if you have something that can, copy your spells for free, whether it be like Double Visions, which copies your first spell each turn, you can then pay 3 mana, then you end up with 8 mana. That's not bad, but honestly, I feel like we have a better version of this card in Standard right now in Throne of Eldraine, 4-cost red sorcery or instant, I don't remember. Either way, it adds 7 mana. but, you know, this one's fine because it does have that modal ability. Maybe you'll be able to, like, actually use it to win the game. I don't know. I'm kind of torn on this card. Maybe it can be used in some janky way, but I'm not really seeing it. Next, we have Axguard Calvary. It's a 2-cost red 2/2, and it's a dwarf berserker, by the way. And you can tap it to give target creature haste until end of turn, which technically give it to itself, but that's kind of useless. So yeah, you can kind of put this down. It's not bad, 2/2 for 2, and then maybe you get one of your big creatures, and you can just have them attack right away. I'm not a big fan of it. I would rather just have something that gives all of my creatures haste, which I know is a little more expensive, but the fact that I have to, like, tap this to only give one thing haste just feels bad, and most of the time isn't super relevant. Outside, you know, there are some situations where it is, but you're better off just giving everything haste. It's much more likely that you create like a bunch of tokens and want to swing with all of them than one big thing, but it's fine. It's a common. I don't know why I'm overanalyzing these commons. Next, we have Warstorm Surge. It's a 6-cost black, not black, red enchantment, and whenever a creature enters the battlefield under your control, it deals damage equal to its power to any target. So this is very, very, very similar to a card we have now called Terror of the Peaks. It does this exact thing, but it's a creature. It costs a little bit less, or yeah, I believe it costs 5. So you can give it essentially less, you know, risk of dying by having it be an enchantment for 1 more, but the disadvantage is it's not a creature, so it can't swing. So you are kind of paying 6 for a do-nothing enchantment, versus with Terror of the Peaks, you are also getting a creature out of it. So I prefer that card, but now we have 2 of the same effect, so if you're running this in like a brawl deck, you might want to also throw this in. Next, we have Tibults Trickery, which I believe is what I'm naming the video after. It's a red counterspell. So it's a 2-cost red instant, and it says counter target spell. Choose 1, 2, or 3 at random. Its controller mills that many cards, then exiles cards from the top of their library until they exile a non-land card with a different name than that spell. They may cast the card without paying its mana cost. They put the exiled cards on the bottom of their library in a random order. So essentially, you are countering the spell and giving them a random spell in its place. So it's kind of a chaosy effect. But you might be wondering, why is that choose 1, 2, or 3 and mill? It just seems like such an added step. It makes this spell so much harder to cast, and I believe the reason that they have it like this is that you can't put things on the top of your library. Otherwise you could counter your own spell, guaranteed have something on top and cheat it out, versus this is going to get the top 3 cards out of your way. So if you can manage to put a card 4 down, you know, you're pretty good. But the issue is it's chosen at random, so it's trying to make it much harder for you to determine what is going to happen. So it's definitely a balancing thing. So it's essentially saying, yeah, you might be able to get it. You might get lucky. You're guaranteed not getting the top card, but maybe you'll get the second card. Maybe you'll get the third card. Maybe you'll get the fourth, or maybe they're all lands and it doesn't really matter. But, yeah, that's definitely why that is there. I first was a little bit confused, but yeah, you're essentially doing like a counterspell mid, you know, thing. Now, if you only have 2 spells in your deck, if you have Tibults Trickery, and 1 other card, you can guaranteed get that card out, and you might be like, what, 1 other card? Essentially what you do is you counter someone's spell, and then counter your own Tibults Trickery to then go tutor something because it can't share a name. So yeah, you could definitely do some really janky stuff with this. I think it'll be an interesting card, and it's weird to see red get counter spells. I feel like, you know, we've seen a couple weird counter spells, and I feel like every time, like, Mark Rosewater talks about it, he's like, yeah, that's mostly a blue thing, we're not really doing that in other colors, and here it is. So yeah, very, very interesting. I don't really feel like it breaks too much. It is a little bendy of the color pie in my opinion, but it is definitely doing a red effect. It's just doing it a little faster than normal. Next, we have a Toralf, God of Fury. It's a 4-cost red legendary creature god 5/4 with trample, and whenever a creature or planeswalker an opponent controls is dealt excess non-combat damage, Toralf deals damage equal to the excess to any target other than that permanent. So the idea is, okay, say you have a 5/5 and you swing and they block. Oh, no, sorry, it's non-combat. Say they have a 3/3, and you have a spell that deals 5 damage to any target. You deal 5 damage to that 3/3. You have 2 damage that was technically dealt, but didn't matter because the creature died. Toralf is going to take that 2 damage and let you target something else. So let's say you have a spell that does 8 damage to a creature, but they have 8 1/1s. Here's what's going to happen. You're going to deal 8 damage to the first one, and there's going to be 7 excess damage. Then, you are going to move to the second one, and it's going to deal 6. It's going to have 6 excess, but that still is a non-combat damage. So Toralf is then going to let you redirect it. So it lets you use every single drop of damage. If you have some huge spell, it does a bunch of damage, but only to a single target, you can split it among a lot of things. And what's cool is that it's a new effect that we really haven't seen before, but it's also a Modal double face card. So we also have Tolof's Hammer. It's a 2-cost, a red legendary artifact equipment, and the equipped creature has pay 1 in a red, tap and unattach it, and it deals 3 damage to any target and return it to its owner's hand. So what's really cool about this is you can play the hammer early on, and then you can kind of bounce it back to your hand, and then Toralf, you can then play Toralf. So you can kind of, I believe the blue god did this as well, play the first half when it's nicer and more convenient, and then eventually return it back to your hand to then play Toralf. And then the hammer also says, by the way, a quick creature gets +3/+0 as long as it's legendary, so encouraging you to play legends, but honestly, you're probably just playing it for that first ability. It's removal that is repeatable, and then can eventually get you to Toralf. And if you're running this in a non-singleton format, if you have both Toralf and Toralf's Hammer, not an awful combo, being able to repeatedly deal 3 damage to any target. Toralf will let you kind of split that. Definitely an interesting thing, and one that is very unique. Next, we have Roots of Wisdom. It's a 2-cost green sorcery, and it says mill 3 cards, so that's you milling 3 cards. Then return a land or elf card from your graveyard to your hand. If you can't, draw a card. This is a very interesting effect. We don't see this very often, of like a return a land from your graveyard to your, or like look at the top 5 cards of your library, pick a land. If you can't, draw a card. This one's a little different. Obviously, it's not actually looking at your library, but it's that same kind of feeling of like, if you can't, you're actually still getting something out of it. So I think it's actually a pretty interesting card. Next, we have Borealis Outrider. It's a 3-cost green snow creature, elf warrior, 3/2. And whenever you cast a creature spell, if snow of any of that, if snow mana of any of that spell's colors was spent to cast it, that creature enters the battlefield with an additional +1/+1 counter. So essentially, if you spent a snow mana to cast the creature, it enters with a +1/+1 counter. Yeah. That's what it is. They worded that very, very weirdly. You may have to actually cast for like a color of it. I don't know. Maybe generic mana doesn't work. I don't know. Very, very weird worded card. Not even that great of an effect. I'm just going to move on. Next, we have Guardian Gladewalker. It's a 2-cost green creature, shapeshifter with changeling. It's a 1/1, and when it enters the battlefield, put a +1/+1 counter on target creature. Again, I don't see the effect being really anything people care about. See people caring more about the fact that it is a changeling. Next, we have Cardus Vicious Return. It's a 4-cost black and red saga, and the first phase, when you first cast it, you may sacrifice a creature. When you do, it deals 3 damage to any target. So you can sack a creature to deal some damage, but you don't have to. It says may. Then pay 2, each player discards a card, including yourself, and then return target creature card from your graveyard to the battlefield, put a +1/+1 counter on it, it gains haste. So you are going to kind of hurt everyone, and then just return something. You can return the creature you sacrificed in the first one. You can return something else. Definitely a versatile card, but not one that really excites me in any way. Next, we have this card, which translates into Fall of the Imposter. It's a 3-cost green and white enchantment saga, and for the first and second phase, you can put a +1/+1 counter on up to 1 target creature, and then for the third phase, you can exile a creature with the greatest power among creatures target opponent controls. So essentially, you're gonna get a really big creature. Here's something kind of interesting. It says you can put the counters on up to 1 target creature. It can be an opponent's creature, which you might be like, why would you do that? It's because you're exiling the thing with the greatest power. So let's say they have a vanilla 5/5, and then they have a 4/4 double strike vigilant something. On turn 2, you can put a counter on it, or both turns, for instance, you can put a counter on it, and then it'll eventually be bigger for the third phase to exile it. You're not generally going to want to do that, but it is definitely something you can do if you really, really need to get rid of something. This can technically do that. Next, we have Cardura, translated into Cardura Doomscourge. It's a 4-cost black and red legendary creature, demon berserker, 4/3. And when he ETBs until your next turn, creatures your opponents control attack each combat if able and attack a player other than you if able. So you essentially goad all the creatures so that they have to attack. And then whenever an attacking creature dies, each opponent loses 1 life and you gain a life. So essentially you say, hey, everything attack me, and then you probably have some sort of backup plan to kill all the attacking creatures, which will gain you a ton of life and hurt your opponents. You can also take out their most important pieces. It feels like a very commandery kind of card that was very intended for that. I mean, the fact that it's everybody and they don't necessarily swing at you, so then you're, you know, a very, very, very interesting card that I think has a lot of potential, but it's not my style. Next, we have Morite of the Frost. It's a 5-cost green and blue legendary snow creature shapeshifter. It's a 0/0 with changeling. So again, changeling's pretty interesting, but you may have it enter the battlefield as a copy of a permanent you control, not a creature, just anything. So it can be a land, a land, an artifact, an enchantment, a planeswalker, any of that. Except it is legendary, so make sure, you know, you don't have 2 of them. And snow in addition to its other types, and if it's a creature, it enters with +2, +1/+1 counters on it, and has changeling. So you can basically make a copy of a creature, then give it all creature types. You can make a copy of lands, except they're legendary. Lots of interesting things. You can turn anything into a snow permanent, you can turn anything into a changeling, and you can turn anything legendary. This card has so many applications in janky decks, and I love it for that. Next we have Jorn, God of Winter. It's a legendary snow creature god, 3/3, and whenever it attacks, untap each snow permanent you control, which if you're playing this in like maybe a mono green deck, which you're probably not, but we'll talk about why in a second, you can just kind of untap everything. But if you're just using snow lands, you untap all of your lands, and that's a pretty big effect. And then Kaldheim, the Rime Staff, is a 3-cost blue and black, so this is actually a 3-cost or 3-color card. Legendary snow artifact, you can tap and you may play target snow permanent card from your graveyard this turn. If you do, it enters the battlefield tapped. So the one side's going to care about if you have a bunch of snow permanents on the battlefield. The other one cares if they are all dead. So for instance, if you cast Jorn and you don't have any snow permanents, that's not great. If you cast the Rime Staff and you don't have anything in the graveyard, that's not great. But they both work great on the opposite end. So you always have something you're going to want to cast, assuming you're in these colors. But here's the thing. There have been multiple green cards where I've been like, yeah, I could see mono green running all snow lands so that they can play this. And this is another one of those cards where mono green, you know, 3/3 for 3, not bad. The fact that it untaps most of their lands is insane. So I definitely think mono green could actually run this and just ignore the back completely. So I would not be surprised if that makes its way into a bunch of decks, just because that effect is so crazy. Also, by the way, he untaps himself too. Just a note, whenever he attacks, untap each snow permanent. He is a snow permanent, so pretty cool. And if you have both Jorn and Kaldheim out, he will untap Kaldheim, so that you can, you know, do it again. Then we have Faceless Haven. It is a snow land that taps for colorless, and then you can pay 3 snow mana. By the way, not tapping, so you could technically tap it, but you wouldn't want to, and you'll see why. It becomes a 4/3 creature with vigilance and all creature types until end of turn. It is still a land, so you do need 3 sources of snow mana, but because snow basics are a thing, it's definitely not that hard to do. You are kind of paying 4 mana, although it does have vigilance, so you can swing with your land and then pay with stuff later. It is another snow land. It's another colorless land. Full colorless decks are going to love this card, kind of, except they're going to have trouble paying for it, so maybe not, but I don't know. Land creatures, another one. I'm fine with it. Next, we have Bloodline Pretender. It is a 3-cost artifact creature, shapeshifter, changeling. So this one is, by the way, a changeling in colorless at 3 mana. Very crazy. It's a 2/2, and when it enters the battlefield, choose a creature type. Whenever another creature of the chosen type ETBs, put a +1/+1 counter on Bloodline Pretender. Looks like shapeshifters are really caring about +1/+1 counters. Alright guys, so that's going to do it for today's video. I hope you guys enjoyed. It's been a pretty long one. We talked about a bunch of cards. I want to know what you guys think about them in the comments down below. I will see you in the next one.